explain outer product. What is outer product? Anybody care to look at it? Any comment? Are you awake? Let me ask somebody randomly. Okay, Sri Lakshmi. There are two Sri Lakshmi, or any one Sri Lakshmi. The Sri Lakshmi with the picture. Can you can you tell me what's an outer product? Can you hear me? Sri Lakshmi S. Can you tell me what is an outer product? Yeah, tell me. Good. So if I have two vectors, okay, let me call it U. So this is vector 8. Two vectors, three component vectors. So how should I do a dot product, and how should I do a dot product means an inner product, and how should I do an outer product? Can you tell me?
Yes, sir, but we don't consider the things that are in the same dimension, one with the other two dimensions, like that.
Yeah, say that once more. So let's say I want to do first. Let me say let's say I want to do inner product. So inner product is shown as dot in the middle.
Yeah,
So
in
how is the
that
inner?
we take U1 V1 plus V2 U2 V2, like that.
3 V3. Okay. Now what is the outer product?
In that we take uh, U3 U3 U2 minus U2 U3, like that. Yeah.
U2 U3 U.
No, after writing such something.
So it is going to be a matrix. You know that?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. Now what is the rule?
We don't consider the same thing.
So take each entry and multiply it with each of the entries, right?
Oh, yes, sir.
So U1 V1, U1 V2, U1 V3. So U2 V1, U2 V2, U2 V3, U3 V1, U3 V2. No, I'm doing some typo. V2, U3, V3. So this is an outer product. Okay. So now, so
Yes,
this
sir.
is equivalent to basically this. So if this is your U, so which is like written like a row vector, and this is V, which is also written like a row vector, but you want to do U dot UV. Okay. So then this is the one is row, another is column in one order. This is the other order. One of them gives you a scalar, another of you gives you a matrix. So you will learn more in the mathematical physics constant in that context, that it is basically the outer product is basically increase the rank of a tensor. One is reduces the rank of a tensor. But let's use this for our purpose here. Okay, just learn why, how is it meaningful. So we remember, if you remember that I kept saying this, that if I take this example, that I have a vector. So let me take a vector. So this is x vector. This classical x, but I am writing in this abstract notation just to make you familiar. So x is basically 1 0 0, y is basically 0 1 0, and z is basically 0 0 1. Okay. Now, if I want to, so, or I can call it 1 2 3 x y z, whatever you want. So now I can construct a P3, and that P3 will be what? P3 is basically, let me call it PZ. Okay, PZ or P3, whatever you want. So what is the PZ? The projector? Anybody? make some space here. So what is the PZ? The projection onto the Z state or Z vector. What is that in this notation? Anybody? Any comment?
Outer product of Z and Z.
Okay, so outer product of Z and Z. So what is that in this notation? So it should be 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, right? Agree to that? Agree, disagree?
Yeah.
Don't understand? Okay. So what is this object according to this definition?
3 by 3 matrix.
Yes. What are the entries?
0 0 0 0 except the left right side corner.
Right. So similarly, Px, if you do play the same game, is 1 0, sorry, 1 0 0 and 1 0 0. So this is 1 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0. Okay. Similarly, Py is basically 0 1 0 0 1 0. You can show 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 0. So now if you add Px plus Py plus Pz, what do you get?
Identity.
Correct. You get identity. Right? So this is basically the thing which we have learned in the last class, the projection operator and identity mathematically. But we also learned it physically. Remember every equation has a mathematical interpretation and a physical also, because we showed in terms of the speed matrices using the Stern-Gerlach operators, that one is basically measuring the Stern-Gerlach, this modified Stern-Gerlach twice. Then using that we showed that how the square is equivalent to doing it once, and if you do plus and then minus, you get 0. Okay, so everything is clear from all the aspects, right? Now you can do it
Yes.
for any vector. So this is now when we are working on this quantum mechanical example, in the vector dimension, etc., all these things are dependent on various things. So you can try this example also. So for example, here I did this XYZ by taking this as standard, right? I took it 1 0 0 0 1 0. This is 1 1 1. But it could be an arbitrary direction. For example, I can take a cube. I can take a cube and take the line that is connecting origin to this edge. Okay. So if this is my origin, and let me declare it as my x-axis or z-axis, whatever. Let me call it my x-axis. So then what is the x-axis? What is the vector? Anybody? Can you tell me what is the x-axis? If this is my x-axis, what is the coordinate in this system, global coordinate system? This is 1 1 1 by root 3. Agree?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if it's my x-axis, then I can declare a y-axis, which is along this direction, let's say. So this is what? 1, 1, minus 1, something like that. And there will be a z-axis. So you can make this up, right? You declare x and y, which are orthogonal to each other, take their cross product, get the z. Arbitrary combination. Now play the same game. So instead of this 1 0 0 0 1 0, it will be like some 1 1 1 by root 3, 1 1 minus 1 root 3, some combination. Figure it out. It's very easy. It's just geometry. And then do the same algebra and show that this combination will still give you identity with respect to this new thing, because these properties are intact irrespective of how you choose to represent your x-axis, y-axis, and z-axis. So do you think you can do that exercise? In Python and Mathematica, there is a one-line command to do this product, Kronecker. It's called Kronecker product. But you can also do it by hand. At least do once in your lifetime by hand. Then you give it to computer. because otherwise you don't know what the computer is doing inside. Okay, so do the exercise. So this is an abstraction. Now what is interesting that this statement is always true. So this particular abstract algebraic property. So that is what you learn in a mathematics linear algebra course or something. You learn to make it abstract such that it is generally true. All the properties which are generally true, irrespective of your specific choice. And that is the linear algebra property we are interested about, because our states, their dimension, all the aspects there are a lot of arbitrary factor into it. So even though those arbitrary factors are there, these properties will still define the structure of the theory, and we will see which property is more desirable, which properties we want, and all that. And remember, everything is deeply rooted in the physics, because it's end of the day, it's a physics problem. So every equation, everything you write must be connected to some physical factor. So now you revise, you go back to this example I have discussed in the lecture 4, which is using this Stern-Gerlach and discussing this projection operator and the pictures and draw it again. Then everything will be even more clear. Okay? So now we also declared that any arbitrary vector, one can write it as this CNN, where and now I can again discuss this, that what is this projection doing. So let's take an arbitrary vector. So let me take arbitrary vector in this space 1 1 oh, what is happening? 1 1 2. Okay, so now this 1 1 2 I can express it as a linear combination of 0 1 0 0 0 1 0. I should not have write it 1 1 1. This is 0 0 1 0 0 1, right? So then what will happen if I do pz on 0 on 1 1 2? What will I get? Anybody? So this means that, so P, this is an arbitrary vector. Let me call it some psi. So then change the notation a bit. Then I want to add this on this side. So what is the pz?
We'll get 0 0 2.
Right? We get 0 0 2. Everybody agrees to that, right? So what did I get here? The projection of the vector on the z-axis, right? Because 1 1 2 ka projection is 2. Okay. Now this is a very trivial example, and you can already visualize everything. But you cannot visualize all these things easily if you choose this arbitrary axis. 1 1 1 by root 3 1 1, some complicated axis, and even if it is living in some abstract space, Hilbert space with complex coefficient and all. That is why you need this machinery. Okay. What you can say, obviously you can see it is 1 1 2. It is if you project it on the z-axis, this is 2. You know that, but it is not so obvious in some other complicated context. Even in this context, it is not so obvious. Even this context. Then imagine what will happen in some infinite dimensional Hilbert space. How it is. So this formalism gives us a machinery to do that kind of calculation. Okay, that is why we are learning. Everything makes sense so far?
Yes.
Okay, good. Don't think it as a isolated new thing. It's everything you know already. It's just a new language. The part which you don't know already is in past 3 lecture. That why you need a description. What does it mean for that? Okay, that is the much more non-trivial thing. These things you know. And once you justify yourself that why you need this language to describe that, everything else follows automatically. So now this resolution of identity, you can also test these ideas. Take 1 1 2, express it like that, and you can work out each of these coefficient. This Cn is basically this psi. I can use some identity times psi, and I can rewrite this as some m psi sum over m. So this is nothing but my Cm. I'm just dummy index n or m, whatever I use. So how will I find that? By taking the inner product of psi with that m. So again, test these ideas against those vectors. Then you will be completely confident about all those things. Okay, so everything is clear till now, I hope. So now I will go on to talk about the next thing in the agenda. which is so one thing I justified in the pre-recorded lecture, and I hope everybody now by now is in the same page about it, that a measurement is an operator. Why is that? Because that we argued in the context of Stern-Gerlach. Right now we are talking about discrete vector space and discrete Hilbert space problems, which means if you do a measurement, the possible values you can get are finite and discrete, not infinitely many or continuous. So for that, this machinery is very is directly borrowed from linear algebra, and it's easy for us to understand. But it is also true, the same machinery works also for infinitely many continuous variables. That is not so obvious, that requires a little bit of work, but it's not a work which is outside your expertise or outside your domain. And if you go to the pre-recorded lectures of supplementary, that work I have done there. But we'll come to that explanation later. But let's, for time being, stick with the discrete problem, which means everything you can visualize in terms of Stern-Gerlach. Like Stern-Gerlach 2 spin is a two-state problem. A Hilbert space dimension is 2. Spin 1 is basically 3. Hilbert space dimension is 3. You will learn those things more deeply later, that why half is 2 and 1 is 3 and 2 is 5 and so on. And but right now accept these words, and because you have seen it, of course, in some form in chemistry or somewhere, that this 2s plus 1 space quantization. So use that experience just to know that this happened, this is true. But why and how exactly it is true, that you will learn in the angular momentum part of this course, where we will discuss this representation and all. But so one, you similarly need like 5 dimension. So you can do also a Stern-Gerlach for spin S. That is, there are 2s plus 1 component spins will be there. And this is actually an assignment problem, which I have already given you. I think assignment 3, probably assignment 3, it is there. You can see that it's already there. So this machinery can work in all these dimensions. But one thing why I hope you are convinced by now, that the act of passing through a Stern-Gerlach device is a measurement, which you of course know because it's filtering. And even if it is not a if it is not doing, for example, modified Stern-Gerlach experiment is not doing anything, but I can also visualize it as a measurement which is doing nothing. Nothing means identity operator. So whatever you get in, you get the same thing outside. That means you are doing nothing. That is an identity operator. But if you are doing something, then one state goes to another state. A state is a vector in this context. Again, I'm continuously using the word vector, but it is strictly not a vector. I'll come to that point also today. It is not a, it is a projective vector or a ray, but for ease of understanding, let's call it vector. So if you need a machinery that converts a vector into another vector, and that machinery is operator. So that is also, I tried to convince you earlier, that if you act an operator on a vector, you get another vector. And now we are trying to understand the construction of that. So we have to understand the action of an operator on a vector space. Now there was a little bit of confusion when I discussed this last time. So let me discuss that once more, just to clarify. So this should be easy to convince, that all we want to understand is the action of an operator on the basis vectors of a on the basis vectors of a Hilbert space, or some vector space. Let's not use the word Hilbert space. On the basis vectors of a vector space. Why so? Because any vector is a linear combination of basis vector. So if you understand how a operator acts on the basis vector, you can tell anything about any other vector. So we realize that. So now if n is a particular basis vector, so the action of alpha on n will take it to some other vector. And then there was one example which Anish talked about last time. You can check that it is true in a 2 by 2 space, and so the generic action will be some alpha mn m. Now we also discussed that how to, so n, notice that n, m all are basis vectors in that space. You can also check this using this your vector examples, just like last time. So we also discussed that this alpha nm must be alpha m alpha n. So that is how I can find it by using the property that since they are basis orthonormal basis vector, they must satisfy m in delta mn. This is also something we have argued last time. Okay, now this is basically, this object is basically a matrix element of that, because so you can say this is the matrix element of alpha between basis vectors m and n.
Sir, does
Okay.
the set of M also include N?
Yeah, it can also include n. Yeah, so those are diagonal entries. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a generic. So then those are alpha n, the diagonals of that matrix.
So the M is not necessarily the same set of basis vectors
No,
that
it is the same set, because
Right.
otherwise you cannot use this property.
correct. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Now we also talked about this, the notion of an eigenbasis. So this is what I will elaborate on a little more today. So eigenbasis are special vectors in this space which satisfy the following property. Okay. Which means if you act the operator on this set special vectors, you get the same vector with some number pre-multiplied, but you get another vector which is, so earlier, so imagine this in some abstract sense. Okay, I'm drawing an arrow, that doesn't mean it is always an arrow, but since we are familiar with thinking vectors as the definition of vector as an object which has a direction and magnitude. So this is also something interesting. You will notice as you grow in your in physics courses, you will get every time a new definition of vector, which is more generic. Like right now, you are getting this more general definition of a vector space and all. When you study general relativity or special relativity or even some a little advanced classical mechanics, you will see the definition of vector is given in terms of transformations. Vectors are objects we transform in a certain way. So basic, but these are all not different definition. They are all the same thing, more and more specialized, more and more actually generic properties. The vector you learned in school or in some earlier courses, the vector has an arrow and direction is a special case of these generic categories. So I'm drawing it like an arrow, but it need not be. Okay. So this is, let's say this is a vector. So now if you act a operator means some operations. For example, rotation is an operation. There could be other kind of, you stretch it, rotate it, do something, some reflect, something. Linear operation. So when you do, it becomes another vector. Okay, it becomes another vector. So the operator which does that is this. Now there is an identity operator, which means do nothing operator, which does nothing. But there are special operators which all it does is either make it longer or shorter, which means it remains the same vector except prefactor comes in front. Now again, this whole thing can be complex, then you cannot draw such a nice picture. Okay, just know that this is the analogy of that in your familiar school level vectors. Okay, so this is again basically some object like this, some vector in your generic language. So this alpha again is some matrix form. So a vector converting to vector. So this notation comes like alpha 1 2 dot 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 alpha 2 1, some matrix which acts on this, gives a scalar times this vector. So this is a linear system of equations. And you know that how to find these eigenvectors or eigenvalues, ASI, right? So you do this basically determinant of this alpha matrix minus identity times A, solve this, This is a nth order polynomial equation, and you get n roots, and each of these roots are basically your eigenvalues. And once you know the eigenvalues, you can find the corresponding eigenvector. So you told me you are familiar with this exercise, right? How to do that? If I give you an arbitrary matrix, you know how to do this operation by on your hand, not in a computer. You know that, right? Okay. And you also know that once you find the eigenvectors values, how to find the eigenvectors, and once you find the eigenvector, how to make sure they are mutually orthonormal. Okay? So this is basically the job is to find the n eigenvalues, and corresponding to each eigenvalue, there is a unique eigenvector. So right now I am assuming there is no degeneracy. If degeneracy is there, some kind of special thing will happen, which I'll talk about in a moment. So no degeneracy. So each eigenvalue will have assigned a unique eigenvector, which are orthonormal. So you make sure they are normal to each other, and they are orthogonal to each other, and then you can also normalize it if you want. Normalize it means make sure the magnitude is 1. This is an essential thing for quantum mechanics, but in general you don't always need to do that. Okay, now we will define another thing called Hermitian adjoint, which is also, I think, you are familiar with. So if a operator is alpha, its adjoint is defined as alpha dagger, and it is defined as follows. So you need two vectors to define it. So it is alpha, you act alpha dagger on psi, you get another vector, take its inner product with another vector phi. So the definition is as follows. So alpha dagger means this, which means you flip those two vectors, order of those two vectors, and take a complex conjugate. So this is definition. Okay, why you need definition? This definition I will come in a moment. So what does it mean when you do something like that? So let's say this phi and psi are some m and n. So it gives you some discrete matrix elements. So this alpha dagger is nothing but alpha star n and m. Notice, because these two orders are flipped. So that's why alpha dagger must be this alpha star nm. And that means this is basically equivalent to taking the matrix, extending the rows and column, which means taking a transpose and taking a complex conjugate of each of the entries. Now there is another definition. So when you do that, if this happens, that this alpha dagger is same as alpha, then those matrices are called Hermitian, which means these two entries are equivalent. So if I want to write in this language, then Hermitian means alpha mn is equal to alpha star nm. So operationally it means if I give you a matrix, you take the conjugate of each entries and then do a transpose. Now if the new matrix you get is identical to the original matrix, it's a Hermitian matrix. This is the definition. Now Hermitian matrices has some desirable properties which we want in our quantum mechanical systems or our physical system. That is why we are discussing this. And that is why we want to represent, because we said act of measurement or any act of this Stern-Gerlach, which is even no measurement, I call it a measurement, because it's trivially it is like identity, not doing anything. So this action I term is as a operator which acts on these vectors and convert it to another vector. So operator that acts on a vector and gives another vector is a matrix. And now we are arguing there are special kind of matrix which has certain properties and they are more desirable for the physical context, and those special kind of matrices are called Hermitian matrices. Okay, so this is the line of thought, this is the line of argument. That was also the original line of argument. If you read Dirac's book, which is what I recommend, because he is the person who developed this formalism, you'll see that was his line of argument. Okay, so now I argued that this is basically the property. So that means this matrix must have the following property, that the diagonal elements are real, because diagonal elements are going to itself. So alpha nn is alpha star nn. So if a number, if its and its conjugate are equal, its imaginary part has to be 0. So diagonals are real, and the off diagonals are satisfying this property. So I am using a new index ij to remind yourself they are strictly off diagonal. Okay, or let's not use a new index. So alpha mn star alpha nn. Okay, when m and n are not equal to, when they are equal to, they are just first statement is true, they are real. Okay, so now let's talk about some properties. This is the reason why we like these matrices, why we are talking in terms of this. What are the desirable properties of these Hermitian matrices? So properties of Hermitian matrices. So it is, are you all over familiar with this, or this is helping you in some way, this discussion? Let me know, okay? Because this is also very important. So if I think I told you that before, some context, that if it is too easy for you, you will be bored. If it is too hard for you, you will be frustrated. So you have to tell me. So my job is to maintain the balance between these two forces, and whether you are neither, whether things are neither too easy for you, neither too hard for you. So you have to tell me that if that is happening. So I hope this discussion is not redundant, which means you know all this stuff and I'm doing it, it's just a repetition and you are bored.
So I don't think we have encountered Hermitian in any previous course before.
Oh, you never encountered the Hermitian matrices?
No.
Okay, then I have to go actually in more little. But then did you understand when I said that when I gave this definition and tell, it means that the diagonal entries are real?
Yes.
And this sort of thing, this you understand, right? You are following the statement. Okay, so play with a little bit. Go to Wikipedia, check some examples like that. So for example, if I say 1 plus I 1 plus I 2, is this a Hermitian matrix or not? So this kind of check to do that. Okay, this is not, of course, because these are not conjugate part. If you take conjugate, it becomes a totally different matrix. What you have to do to make it Hermitian, you have to replace this plus by a minus, that sort of thing. Play with a little bit of examples. We want to know things as from a practical point of view, not from an abstract point of view. Okay, that part you will learn in math course or mathematical methods course. Here we just want a what is that called, radio mechanic type of knowledge. You know, radio mechanic knowledge. So there was a radio mechanic near my home who didn't know what is a capacitor, what is a inductor, but can fix a radio. If you give a radio, it's not working, can fix it. It's practical. He has the practical knowledge, but doesn't understand how these functions work. So that should not be the state of our knowledge. We will learn that, but we'll learn that in other courses, like in math methods or math courses. We'll learn all the detailed definition, where this comes from, where it is used, what are the other possibilities. But since this course is a quantum mechanics course, here I'll give a very practical approach, which means you learn what is this and where to use it in what context. That's all. Okay. So do some example and learn the radio mechanic approach of this. Okay. So now let me talk about some properties which makes it very desirable in this context. So first property, so try to prove this. Okay, this is there in any book, and you can in Griffiths or any book. So eigenvalues of these matrices are real. Okay, so what you have to do for that, you have to start with this. You have to start with this guy, a mu, alpha mu. Let's say you get a eigenvalue that is mu. Okay, this is, and show that a mu must be real. How can you show that? You have to take a conjugate of these and subtract that from each other, and then you show that if this matrix is. So I'm giving a sketch of the proof. So take a conjugate. Conjugate means take a dagger in both sides, not the complex sense, and subtract these two forms from each other. Then use the property that a mu, sorry, that alpha dagger is alpha, use this property to show that this matrix, this object mu can be only real. It cannot have any imaginary part. Okay. It's a two-line proof. Just try it. Second proof is a little more non-trivial. So they are eigenvectors that correspond to different eigenvalues are orthogonal. What does it mean? It means if I have a mu, alpha nu, a mu, then mu is 0 if mu is not equal to mu. Okay. Try to also prove that. This is also very simple. Both of these are two-line proofs. Just by using this property and then using this property, you can build up one after the another. Okay. Try that. If it doesn't work, if you're unable to do that, we'll discuss it again. Now the third property is degeneracy. In the previous two, I made an assumption that two eigenvalues are always different, but that need not be true. It can turn out that even though mu and nu are different, the mu and nu can be same, which means two eigenvalues are same. That's an example of degeneracy. So when that happens, so let me write that context. So gamma is an additional level which I introduced to say that there are S eigenvalues which are equal to each other, which means even if I have, so mu1, mu2, mu2, mu3, all these things have the same eigenvalue mu. It doesn't matter what is the gamma, and there are S of them. Now the interesting statement comes: if that is true, then this must be also true. So any linear combination of these gamma, these guys, is also an eigenvector. Any linear combination is also an eigenvector. So let me give a pictorial meaning for that. So first of all, do you agree that that should be the case? So if I have a particular, there are S eigenvectors which have the same eigenvalue, then any combination of them is also an eigenvector. Do you agree to that statement?
Yes.
Do you think that should happen intuitively? Okay, someone else other than Yash? Any comment? How about, let me ask somebody randomly. Pranab Gopalan, did you understand this statement? Do you agree to that should happen, or do you want demonstration? Or is it clear, obvious that must happen? Are you there? Pranab, can you hear me? He's probably sleeping.
Sir, can you show a demonstration? I need a demonstration for this.
Okay. Yash, can you explain?
When you you can the common eigenvalue will come, you can take it common from all the suppose if you write a linear combination and then you apply the operator, you will get the same coefficient for each of them, and that can be taken common.
Okay, so if I have a eigenvalue which is eigenvector, let's say it is phi1. Okay, so I call it a1 phi1, some name. Okay, now if there is another eigenvector which is also that, okay, then any phi2, then any linear combination c1 phi1, c2 phi2, will also satisfy this, right? Because this is same. C151 plus C252. Is it clear now? Iwin?
Yes, yeah, it's clear. Thank you.
Okay. So what does it mean physically? Now think again pictorially. Now let's say I have a two-dimensional space, and I argued previously, which I didn't prove, but I want you to try the proof, that the eigenvectors that correspond to defined eigenvalues are orthogonal. So let's say I have a pair of eigenvectors which are orthogonal to each other. Now, if they are degenerate, then any linear combination of them is also eigenvector, which means any combination, these, any combination, infinitely many, right? There are infinitely many eigenvectors. Then how you construct a mutually orthogonal set? So you construct it by choosing arbitrary, so there is an arbitrariness into that. You construct it by choosing an arbitrary linear combination as your first eigenvector, and then you keep finding the new orthonormal eigenvectors to that. All of them are valid. Any arbitrary choice is valid, but you want to make them orthonormal. That is useful for some physical reason, because as you have seen earlier, this orthonormality is useful. So that is the process to construct that. So there are some examples in Griffith, you can look that up. So you are familiar with orthonormal eigenvectors, right? If I give you a set of eigenvectors, how to orthonormalize them, how to do, you know this Gram-Schmidt orthonormalization, right?
No, I don't think so.
Really?
Yeah, we haven't.
Are you sure none of you know? Because I remember last year people said they know. This year I'm wondering how come you don't know. Oh, okay. Pranav Gopalan, he says he learned it. Where did you learn it, Pranav?
In linear algebra.
Oh, so all of you didn't take linear algebra? Is that the case? Was it optional course? Or else how come Pranav learned it and
We all took it, but I think some of us forgot or something.
Okay, then that's it. Then I cannot do much. So
Yeah.
revise. Okay, revise and do some examples. Don't forget stuff. Even after this course, don't tell somebody that I didn't do that. I didn't learn basics of quantum mechanics. Remember it, and only way to remember it is by doing problem, by arguing and thinking. If you listen, you will forget. If you just listen, you will forget. It is like going to a concert and listening to music and hoping that you can be a professional musician. No, you cannot. You have to practice it. So it's similar to that. Please practice. That is why you are saying, I don't know about Stern-Gerlach, I read it, I don't know this detail, that detail. So work out the details. So it's there in the book. Calculate the force, calculate the displacement, all those things. Once you work out in your hand, it will never leave your brain. Okay. These examples also, all of them, you have to work out in your hand. Listening, it will escape immediately. Okay. So let's do some, okay, so I have one example in mind. So try this example. So take this matrix, 1, 1, 1, 1, very trivial matrix. This is a Hermitian matrix, of course. So calculate the eigenvalues. So this is an exercise, okay? Calculate the eigenvalues, first task. Second task is construct eigenvectors. First of all, check if they are real. You can play with some other bunch of Hermitian matrices, okay? And make them also non-Hermitian to see what happens. 1, 1, 0, 1. Let's. So check the counter examples. Then construct the eigenvectors. So do this example. It's very important. If you don't do that, next semester you will forget again. Not even next semester, next week you will forget. So then construct the eigenvectors and check if they are orthogonal. Orthogonal and orthonormal actually. Then show that any arbitrary vector in this space, in this two-dimensional vector space, can be written as a linear combination of them, which means they span this space. They form a basis. Can be written as a linear combination of these eigenvectors. Of these eigenvectors. Okay. So the takeaway point here is Hermitian matrices have real eigenvalue and their eigenvectors forms a complete set. And again, you can cross check this completeness structure, which means if you do this m sum over all the m, it must be 1. So this thing is called completeness and or resolution of identity, as we have learned. Okay, so now these are the basic properties, simple linear algebra. So if you have taken a whole linear algebra course, you are way better prepared than I actually imagined. Because when I learned this thing as a student, I didn't do any linear algebra. This is also something I want to tell you frankly. It took me a long time to understand all this because my courses were not that illustrative. My background was not adequate. I understood it much later. But for you, that should not happen because 10 years have passed in between. World is much more competitive and your background is much more stronger. So you should understand it here only, not 2-3 years later. Okay. So now 2 more theorems. Okay. If 2 operators alpha and beta, so try to prove them, or at least try to do some examples to understand what is it saying actually. That is also very important. Alpha beta have complete set of simultaneous eigenvectors, then they commute. So what does it mean? It means I have 2 operators, 2 different operators, and their eigenvector sets are identical, which means they have simultaneous eigenvector. If that happens, then they must commute. Now, final theorem is the opposite of that, which means if 2 operators commute, which means vice versa will also happen, we can find for them. Always in mathematics, actually, these reverse statements are not always true. We can find for them a complete set of simultaneous eigenvectors. So try to prove these 2 statements. I will go elaborate on this. And in the lecture, I have explained this. It's called this CSCO. I will also talk about it, complete set of commuting observations. I will explain these 2 statements, these 2 mathematical statements. What is more I want to talk about? I want to talk about projective vectors, but there is very little time. So let me give an outline. So let me go over what I said in the note and then talk about it. Okay. So in the pre-recorded lecture, I have made an argument that a measurement or because we know the result of a measurement on a quantum state, a measurement always gives you a real number. So this is what I have argued. Whatever, you don't need an argument, it's an obvious statement. So, but our objects, the things we are playing with are vectors and matrices. How will I get a real number from a vector and matrix? First of all, it has to be real number. So we came to the understanding that if it is Hermitian matrix, there are ways to get real number if it is an eigenvalue. So the way to get a real number from vectors, so I argued in the main lecture, I will not repeat that argument, is either take an inner product with that vector itself or another vector. So we argued this cannot be, none of this can be, this doesn't involve a measurement or an operator. This involves 2 different states, but we want to know what is the consequence of measuring something on a particular state, not between 2 different states. So then we argued the object which is only fits all the criteria, all the bill, is this. So then we tried to make a physical connection with that, and that is what I discussed in the lecture, and I will discuss again further in the next class. So one thing to notice is that if this is the object of physical interest, then any object, okay, that is related to this by a phase factor or a unit modulus complex number, this thing, an unit modulus complex number, will not change this guy. So that means if a W that is related to V by this kind of a factor, then for the W also, if you calculate WAW, these two are same thing. Okay? This is very easy to convince yourself. Again, play with some vector and make sure it is true, and check that at least once with your hand. If you want, you can take 2 by 1 matrices, 2 by 1 vectors, 3 by 1, very simple toy vectors. Okay, but that means what? That means there is a phase. So I'm calling it a phase factor because you will also see that this alpha has to be a unit modulus complex number. That means it's like a phase, e to the power I gamma, because a complex number can be written as r e to the power I gamma. Okay, this looks identical. R e to the power I theta. This some a plus ib can be written like that. So then it is r c theta plus I s theta cos theta sin theta. And if the r is 1, then it's just e to the power I theta. So try to show that this, if you multiply it by such a factor, it doesn't change. Take some vector which has complex entries. So that means it is not just even a vector. So earlier we tried to argue that a vector, if these are my axes, then a quantum mechanical state is basically a vector in this space. Okay? But now I seem to be saying I can multiply it with a factor, and that factor is equivalent to rotating the vector without changing its amplitude. There are infinite possibilities because theta can be anything. There are infinite possibilities. All of them are basically the same state because the measurement doesn't measure the state. The measurement measures a number, and the number is this. And that has nothing to, so any state that is connected to by this transformation will give you the same measurement. So as far as the measurement is concerned, you cannot differentiate between those states. Okay. So this scenario is called a projective vector. So there is a very strict definition of projective vector space and projective vector in math. But I am giving you a very physical and intuitive reason that think of a mathematical object which is this, and if the matter of your physical concern are these states V, and the matter of your the only thing which you can measure in an experiment is this object VAV, then this V cannot be a vector. This V has to be an object, because all the V's which are related to the original V by this transformation will not give a different result from this measurement DAB. So that is why all these vectors can be identified as the same state, and that kind of vectors are called projective vectors. I'll illustrate more on this in the next class. And the bottom line from this is that, so quantum mechanical states are rays. So rays are projective vectors. In a complex vector space, also known as Hilbert space. Second statement is quantum mechanical measurements are operators. We will also illustrate it more, but they are Hermitian operators in this Hilbert space. These two statements are two main key takeaway from this experimental observation and from these mathematical properties, and trying to bring them together. Okay, so these are the mathematical objects you need to describe a quantum mechanical state, a state and a measurement. These are the two things, state and measurement. I will argue more on that a state is not what you think it is, because the act of measurement produces the state, because without that you cannot say anything about the state, right? How many degrees of freedom, what is the dimension, nothing you can say about it. So I will also argue that that how do you actually define a state in this context? Think about this question also. So but we are still calling it state because in English language there is, so the problem is quantum mechanics is discussed by probably, when it was created, it was discussed by probably 10-20 people in the world. Later, now maybe some few thousand, but English language is much bigger than that. So English language doesn't try to come up with a word which is a better representation. So we still use the word state, but state means something that it is there. So in classical context, you say what is a state? State of a particle is position, momentum, something, which is it is whatever it is before you measure, and after you measure, you learn about this. But here, the state is a projective object, which means what you measure, that tells you, that throws the particle into those states. Okay, because until you measured, it was both plus x, plus z, plus z, minus z, all those things at the same time. After you measure, then if your device is SZZ, then it leaves you only two possibilities. And that is why you need a description like that, which means a state, a superposition form which a vectors give you, and a measurement which converts one vector into another vector. So this is the idea. Okay. So that is all I wanted to say for today. I think I covered almost everything except two things are not well explained, which I'll carry on next time. It's also there in the pre-recorded. One is simultaneous diagonalization. I'll show you, discuss some examples. Those examples are already given in a Mathematica file and all. And I will talk a little more about the projective vectors. And then I will talk about infinite dimensional Hilbert space, which means we will now go towards the double slit, not just 2-state, 3-state, n-state, but infinite states. Okay, and then we'll learn why this machinery is also applicable there. It's the exact same thing, just extended that. Okay, so that's all. That's all from my side. If you have questions or want to discuss something, we can talk about it.
Sir, can you scroll up a little bit?
Yeah.
Just a bit down. Just the start. This. So I just wanted to know, like, this object in blue, VAV, it is a complex number, right?
Yes.
What is that object? I mean, what does it represent? Like, I know that omega V represents the probability amplitude of V being.
Yeah, so this is in general a complex number. But if A is Hermitian, then it can be real number. So what does it represent? So, okay, so let me first tell you what it represents, and then I'll tell you why I want to think like that. So it represents the act of measuring A. So if you try to measure A in a state V, the number you get is this, VAV. Okay? Because a measurement must give you a number, right? So you might construct the state, you might describe the state of a system in terms of a vector matrix. You might call a measurement is a matrix, but end of the day, you have to see how you can get a number, because when you measure something, you get a number, right?
Right.
So there are multiple, so starting with a vector and matrix, there are multiple ways to get a number. So I argued two of them and ruled them out. That's why they are not good candidate. I also ruled out this one, WAV, because it involves two states. Then after, if you go to the main, if you see the pre-recorded, I discussed one by one all of them. And finally, I landed on the conclusion that the mathematical object which gives me a number out of a state and a matrix is this, VAB, which doesn't have any of the problems that other objects have. It's a single state and a single operator. And
this is the number I will, if I do an A measurement on state V, this is the number I will
This
measure.
is the number you should get. Now you want this to be also real, because
A
measurement, that's why you want also A to be Hermitian. Now so you might wonder that how I'm constructing this, as if I'm constructing this by elimination and trying to do that.
Yes, exactly.
But if you read Dirac's book, that is how he did it. Because how a particular formalism developed in science is not always very elegant and clean. Okay, people develop it by trial error, doing some dirty things, and then when they write a book, they write it very cleanly. Then you think, oh, what a genius! But when it is developed in a messy way. Okay.
Right.
So this is the best candidate, but always also understand what we are learning is one formulation of quantum mechanics. There are 9 formulations. It's not the only way of thinking about this problem, but this is the most convenient way that works with most problems. Okay? For example, Feynman path integral is altogether different way of thinking about this problem.
And this AV, this like if I just take the operator A on V, this will give me another
Vector, right?
which is the project, like which is the result of this operation, right? Which is the result of
Correct.
that.
Correct. Now
And
do
then-
some examples. Okay. So now do some. Okay, I'll come to the example if it is. What happened? Why my pen is not working? Maybe it is out of charge. Okay. Anyway, so there is a finger writing option also. Okay. So if you act A on some V, you get some W. Okay.
Right.
Then you are measuring what is that W projected on V. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Now you can think about this in terms of this Stern-Gerlach. Oops. This is the problem of finger writing. Anyway, let me draw it here, just making it messy. So some operator SZ acting on, let's say, a plus X. So that will give you something.
Yeah.
So think about it, what it can give you. You will see that it can only give you a plus Z or minus Z. Because X can be written in terms of plus Z and minus Z, and SZ acts on this simply because they are eigenstates of plus X and minus. Now you are measuring its contribution on, let's say, plus X. Now you can again write the plus X in terms of plus Z and minus Z and work out those contributions, right? So this is how operationally you will calculate. This is what it means to measure SZ on a state which is plus X, on a beam which is plus X, made of plus X particle. But you are measuring SZ. Then you will see that what you get is consistent with the experiment.
Is that not like this V or W1? Is it not similar to like when we say that the probability amplitude of W being in V?
Yeah, but what is the W? The W is generated by projecting that operator on that state. Yes.
Right. Okay. Yes. And what do we measure in? Okay, no, that is okay. You measure
You measure a number.
Right.
An act of measurement is a number, and what is that number? That number is some displacement, let's say.
Yeah.
So think about the Stern-Gerlach. It is what are you actually measuring? You are measuring this spin is plus h bar by 2 or minus h bar by 2.
Position of the.
Yeah, and that displacement is proportional to that value.
Yeah.
It is so. What you are actually measuring is that value. What you are actually measuring, is the distance, is the deflection, and that is proportional to a physical property, which is this plus h bar by 2 or minus. That is always true because you never actually, whenever you measure something, you measure a deflection or a displacement in some other device, which is proportional to something original. For example, when you measure your weight, what you measure? You measure the displacement of a needle on a scale, but that is proportional to your weight. It is similar to that.
And like another thing, polarization is a classical phenomenon in this thing, right?
Yes.
Like
you are talking about optical polarization.
Yeah. Like in Sakurai, they've given that analogy, right? With polarization. So,
right.
I'm having trouble why Stern-Gerlach is weird then, because if you just look at it in that way, it's just rotation of the direction of the momentum, of the angular momentum. Right?
No. So one thing. Okay. So let's not mix this with polarization. But in this case, let me stay with the Stern-Gerlach. The Stern-Gerlach tells you the possibility that there are only 2 possible spin states. Okay, plus and minus. It's not a continuous rotation or anything. Okay, plus or minus x, plus or minus y, plus or minus z, and they are mutually
pointing 2 directions basically.
Yes, only 2 directions are possible. Now, why 2 direction? That is related to this other thing I was telling you. like this
Right.
cup plus hand rotation and all those things that you will learn in detail in the angular momentum chapter. But let's just know that there are somehow a electrons as if has some secret needle. That needle can only point up or down. If it is
Yes,
up,
but
it cannot be down, and so on.
yeah, but if you think, suppose z is plus z is up and minus z is down, then all x is doing is that it's rotating it horizontal. It's making the
Yeah.
needle horizontal. And then
Yes.
again, when you go to z, it either makes it up or down with equal probability. So, I mean, it's not.
Yeah, but
Is it
X, so
surprising
the
that
thing is,
sz is lost? The information about sz is lost because you just moved the needle to a horizontal position, right?
yeah, but think in terms of this something that is pointing because they are orthogonal. What is the meaning of orthogonal? Orthogonal means if something is z, it cannot be x. Okay, this is the statement. So that
Right.
means imagine in terms of these balls. So the balls are white or black. They are orthogonal. Orthogonal means if a ball is white, it cannot be black. Right?
Yes, but I think the needle analogy is more appropriate because there is nothing called a gray ball, but here there is something called an x directional spin.
No, there is not. That is the whole point. There is nothing called a gray ball. Similarly, there is nothing called a particular object is some linear combination of plus x and minus x when you measure. Because when you measure, you only get plus x or minus x, plus z or
But when
minus
you're
z.
measuring it in z basis and you get a plus z is a superposition of plus x and
Plus z
minus.
is a superposition, but when you measure, you don't get a superposition. You just get one of them.
But you get plus z, right? And plus z itself
Yes.
is a superposition of plus x and minus x.
That is right. But
So
you
you are
don't.
measuring-
If you measure z, you get z. But if you measure x, you get only plus x or minus x. You can never make that superposition in your.
But measuring in z is the same as measuring the superposition of plus x and minus x. Is what I'm saying.
No, that is not necessarily true because you cannot say that.
What do you
You
mean?
can. You can
It is
because all your evidences are indirect evidence, right? You can say your plus x and minus x is you need that construction that z is a superposition of plus x and minus x to explain the subsequent measurements, right? Otherwise, what you are going to do with that? Am I following your question or you are saying something else?
Yeah, my question is the same, but like for if you take the needle analogy, suppose z is like the vertical direction and x is the horizontal direction.
Yes.
Okay, so when you measure,
Okay, now my charge is up, so let me draw it. Okay, so now you are saying, so you have some three direction. Okay, this is x, this is y and z. Now your electron is originally pointing in this direction, let's say,
okay,
plus x.
or
Now
whatever,
you're-
just say it's pointing in some random direction. We don't know.
Okay.
Now I measure, I put it in a SGZ apparatus. So it will either rotate that needle towards plus z or minus z.
Yeah, so it is oriented in some random n cap direction. Now you are passing it through a SGZ device. Okay. Now after that, it is guaranteed to be in plus. So you are saying it is rotating it in plus z direction.
Plus
Okay.
z, yeah. And then I put it in an X apparatus, and it is like we put it in X and then we put it in Z again. And then we say that after we put it in X, the information of Z is lost. Right? Because if we only took the plus Z and put it in X.
So now you are putting it in X, okay?
Okay. Yeah. And then I'm taking some plus X out of it and I'm putting the plus X back in Z.
So plus X.
Yes.
And this other one is blocked. And the plus X is sent into another
Z.
SGZ. Okay.
And then I get plus and minus again, which was the surprising part. Correct. But if you think in terms of this needle, suppose it's in some n cap direction, let's see what happens. First, it rotates to, let's say, a plus z. Then it rotates 90 degrees to give x. And then if you put it back to z, it doesn't necessarily have to rotate in plus z side. So it can either rotate plus z or minus z. So
that is the explanation, right? That is how, because the plus x is a combination of C1 plus z and minus z, right? So what is the problem here? You are following the explanation that what is how you construct this. because it's a combination of that. If you accept that fact that it is a linear combination of plus z and minus z,
But why is it difficult to, if you think about spin as some direction, as some needle?
no, it is difficult. First of all, x and z are mutually orthogonal. Do you understand that?
What I'm saying is that measuring in plus, what is the difference if I'm saying that I measured it to be plus x, and the second statement is I measured it to be in a superposition of plus z and minus z. In an equal superposition. They are the exact same statement. So why are we saying we cannot measure in the
No, we don't measure it to be superposition on plus z and minus z.
But
In a
x-
given
plus x.
experiment, in the third device, in a given experiment, we either get a plus z or minus z. From there, we deduce that the plus x must be a linear superposition of plus z and minus z. That's why we get this, right?
But the original idea of spin is not they originally thought that before like all this quantum mechanics, they originally thought that spin could be in any direction, right?
Yeah, but in the Stern-Gerlach, the original Stern-Gerlach experiment, that is the main proof, right? The original Stern-Gerlach experiment showed
that can
if
only
you
be
pass through, it can be only in two directions.
and that two direction can be anything. It can be either plus z minus z, and we can also show that it can either be plus x minus x.
It depends
Or-
on which way you align the device.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
There's nothing special about z. Is what the-
No. If it is some zn, you get plus n and minus n.
So my question is,
So
does
z
this
is
device
an arbitrary direction. Yeah.
will it separate the electrons or does it rotate the electron?
No,
Does-
it doesn't. So the statement, the only way to understand is by saying that a electron is a superposition of any arbitrary two spin states, and when you do a measurement which projects on one of these two, then it will project on that state. So if it is so
okay.
the electron that is entering, the only way to explain this is that the electron that is entering is a superposition of all the possibilities. Okay. And then if you orient in n direction, it will separate plus n and minus n.
Okay,
If you
so
orient
I think-
in some n2, it will do n2 minus n2. Right?
Yeah,
So
but
that is
I think the most short way of putting my question is superposition just a superposition just a fancy word of saying that it is actually directed towards the 45-degree angle? Or
no.
it's not.
No.
It's something
No.
different. I don't understand what is the difference between these two statements.
Yeah, so the difference is that it is so first of all, it depending on what you measure, you get these two directions. Okay. So your act of measurement is deciding the direction where it should project, right? Because if you're as you also said that if your device is y, you get plus y minus y. If your device is z, you get plus z minus z. If your device is x, you get plus x minus x, and so on, all the possibilities. Which means the act of measurement is producing these possibilities, which didn't exist earlier.
Or you can say that the act of measurement or whatever this device is rotating the needle from a 45-degree angle to whatever that
You can try to explain that, but then you will be in trouble to explain the subsequent measurement, and you will be also in trouble to include the probability into that. The act of measurement is certainly doing something. Now you can say what it is doing. It is rotating and a mix. So this is one way of saying it actually. So it is anything is possible. You don't know what it is. Doesn't matter also what it is. So first of all, if that is true, then if this was plus z to begin with, so for example, that is why all these variants are very useful. So if you do z, okay, z and z minus z is z, you get 100% plus z. Okay, but if you would have taken minus z, you would have gotten 0% plus z. So that tells you first of all plus z and minus z are orthogonal, which means if you do a plus z, if a state so let's try to explain it using your rotation picture. So let's say a job of a device is to rotate a system a spin is in a probabilistic. So let's say there is a guy sitting in the device who tosses a coin, and if he gets head, he rotates the input state into a plus n direction. If he gets a tail, it rotates into minus n direction. Okay. So let's see if that what that picture does. So first of all, you have to include more and more complexity in that, because this guy have to know that what is entering here. This simple picture needs more extension. Okay. So this guy have to know what is entering, because that guy have to be careful about that. If a plus z is entering, don't rotate it to minus z. Okay. So that rules out one possibility. So let's now see, stretch it further.
Maybe his rotation is fixed to less than 45 degrees. Okay, no, but then
No,
you'll
no,
never
then it
get
will not
plus.
work.
Yeah, okay. You
So
run
I
into,
can.
yeah.
So I'm quite sure that you will run into trouble at one place or the other. But let's try to find it, because I know that people tried this approach also. But let's try to do this. So is it? Let's see some other experiment. What other experiment we can look at? Okay, ZXZ, that one. Okay. So this guy, first of all, it knows that whatever enters, first of all, it has to know that it is not minus z or plus z, because they have to be careful about not projecting it along, and then it rotates it into plus z direction. Okay. Now this guy also have to know what is entering. Okay, because make sure. So whatever it is, its job is it has to be. It cannot be plus x or minus x. Okay. If it is plus x, it's simple. Don't rotate. If it is minus x, then it should not rotate it at all, or it should not let it go outside even. Okay.
Yes.
So now it knows a plus z is entering, and what will it do? It will try to rotate it towards plus x or minus x.
Yeah, he will flip a coin and do that. Yeah. And this he can do because Z and X are not.
No. Then you cannot explain the fourth experiment, because their fourth experiment essentially needs superposition. Right?
Which one? The do nothing or modify?
No, not do nothing. The fourth experiment, because the fourth experiment precisely shows that why you cannot add probabilities. You have to add probability amplitudes. So let me tell you what is the fourth experiment. I don't remember even myself. I have it in the notes. 1, 2. But it's a good way to, nice way to try this. And you'll see there are problems. So the probability way of doing it will not work. You need amplitudes. So that's the point. So fourth experiment is, where is the fourth?
Basically, you need what you are observing to be squared, but the superposition to be in the roots, not the.
Yes. So let's see. Wait. Let's see. Where is that? ZXZ is third experiment. Oh, fourth experiment is the modified. Yeah.
Do nothing.
Do nothing. But, well, which is split it and join it. So that tells you there is something more than just adding these two beams. Okay.
Yeah, there is
adding
difference
is probability.
between, yeah, those two give different results, meaning that probability and amplitude have to be added differently.
Yes. So that gives you that reason that why it is not just adding probability. The classical way of a guy sitting, tossing a coin and rotating will not work. Okay.
Yeah, the main thing is that there is difference, like what you are measuring is the probability, but what is being superpositioned is the amplitude.
Yes. Something else is working behind the scene.
Okay, yeah, got it.
Very good. So yeah, so this is what you should do. You should try to find weight, a flaw, and that will make your. Did you do the fourth experiment? Do means read the fourth experiment.
Yeah,
The
read it, but
modified
I didn't
standard
get
line.
how you concluded it.
Oh, so I concluded it by saying that so the act. So there are two ways I can split an add. Okay. So let me draw the fourth. So I have a Z. Then I have a X. I block this. I have a X. And then I do a Z. Now, if this would have been a regular X, then so the output here is plus Z minus Z. Okay. Now, if I could have done two things, I would have taken a plus X minus X and recombined them at Z. Okay. Or if it is a modified device, then what comes out of there is a plus Z. Okay. So that means there are two ways to add this plus X and minus X. One is the probability way, another is the amplitude way. The amplitude way says that the plus Z is a combination of plus X and minus X in a different way from the probability way. And in order to explain that, then you go to the formalism and then you show. So what did I do here? Plus X minus X. So how can you get a combination of these to give you plus Z and minus Z? The way you can get, if this plus X is basically 1 by root 2 plus Z plus 1 by root 2 minus Z. And this minus X is basically 1 by root 2 plus Z minus 1 by root 2 minus Z. So then if you add these two guys together, then you get a plus Z. But for that you need this minus sign here. You never get a minus sign in a probability addition, right? This minus sign is coming because this coefficient is e to the power I pi something. You can say I'm adding, but there is a I pi. So that clearly tells you there are two defined objects. One is a probability, another is a probability amplitude, and that amplitude is like a vector or a complex vector, which you add and then you get something, and then that explains the result of that experiment. But if you would have splitted the plus X and minus X, then you would have done a regular probabilistic addition. Right? Makes sense?
Yeah. So can we say that
Okay, sir.
the phase, like the concept of
Yeah,
phase,
there is a phase.
is
Yes,
important?
there is a phase. You need a phase. But
It's not
why
only
do you
simple.
need a phase associated with a probability? And the
Yeah.
probability is associated with being or existence of a particle.
Yeah,
in
the
a particular
45-degree rotation one doesn't have anything to do with, like, it doesn't introduce the concept of phase.
Correct.
Which
So
is
you
very
need an intrinsically different way to think altogether that
Mhm.
doesn't exist in classical thinking. That is the whole point. And that is if you have got this, internalize this point properly, then the rest of the course is very easy.
Yeah. I think I was making that mistake. I was thinking of Stern Galag in
No,
terms of.
good that you go through this. This process is very important. Otherwise, if it will be, you won't be able. It will be just information. You don't internalize the thing. So good that you have the more difficulty you face now, and more you work towards it, clearer your understanding will be eventually. So that's very important. Those who have no trouble, they are not thinking. If you have trouble, if you're thinking, you will have trouble. Everybody have gone through that.
Okay, that was it from my side.
Okay. More question
Sir, I didn't get the part when he said the 45-degree won't match up as isn't the same thing
Okay,
as the
yes,
phase
can you
zone?
explain? Yes, can you explain?
Yeah, the 45-degree idea, the rotation idea, does
See,
not
1
have.
by root 2 is 45 degree, just to remind you that.
Yes.
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah.
First
there
one.
is no way to differentiate between like plus x plus minus x and plus x minus minus x. There's no
Yeah,
way.
so this factor of minus is not a classical rotation, right? It's not a 45 degree. Where is this extra pi is coming from? That you cannot think classically.
Yeah, you need an idea of a phase that can help cancel out things.
Okay. But even in our classical waves, we use this complex number and stuff. There also we represent phase with complex numbers. So How is this
Yeah,
different?
this is also, so this is difference because this is not associated with the probability, right? If you remember the double slit experiment, right? In the double slit experiment, you can write this wave is e to the power ikx minus omega t and all that, and then you explain the water wave, electromagnetic wave phenomena, right? But
Yes.
why there is a wave associated with a single particle? That is the peculiarity. Single electron. Remember, this experiment is not, it is one electron at a time.
Yeah.
Right? That is what the peculiarity is.
Oh yeah, that is also there. It's
Yeah.
the phases
All these
cancel
experiments
each
are
other
one
out.
electron at a time.
The
One
phases.
electron is single plus Z plus X, everything.
Yeah,
That
that's
is the
also
peculiarity. That is, so think about all these things together. Don't think about them in isolation.
separately.
Then you see how remarkably peculiar it is. And then there is no explanation at one level deeper. All are interpretations.
Mm.
How can you think about such a thing from a? Is there a underlying classical thing that is allowing this thing that we cannot say?
I think
And
that's what the interpretations try to do, right? They are ready to
the
imagine
interpreter try to
multiple
do.
universes, but they are
Yes,
not ready to accept superposition.
correct. So you want to make sense. Your classical brain tells you keep something intact, and that attempt leads to those superposition, and that is why I want you to keep an open mind to that aspect, that maybe it is something which your classical brain is not even able to imagine. If you try to fit it is like when you translate something, right? And let's say you are translating some other language, something, it's never proper. A perfect translation is not possible, or almost never possible, because they have some weird expression which is
Yeah,
very specific. So it
cultural.
is similar to that. So maybe the underlying nature of the world, I don't know how it is, but we know only the part which is projected into our thinking, right? Our way of thinking. That is why this looks more and more peculiar, and that is why Dyson made that comment. If you see that I made a comment in the Piazza,
Yeah, yeah.
Dyson's code, he is ready to give up that part and not assign any certainty, and that is because the inherent nature of that doesn't mean you should not try, but I'm saying probably that is what is happening, that any attempt to explain it within our classical regime of thinking
Mm.
will lead to another unfalsifiable peculiar theory which is
Yeah.
consistent with the picture. That is why I don't want to enter that part even in the course.
Yeah. Interpretations.
Yes.
It's too weird.
Yeah, but there is a reason that why it is weird, because it's like trying to translate one
Yeah.
thing to another thing which is may not be possible.
Trying to make quantum mechanics classical somehow.
Yeah, somehow underlying it comes from a belief system that there is a underlying classical theory which did not be true. Okay,
Yeah. That's it. Thank you.
good. Okay, see you then.
Bye bye.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, when we'll get that assignment answers then?
Oh, I
When
will.
you'll
I am
send-
waiting for 3 people have not submitted yet. So I'm just maybe I want to. I have the answers written. I'll just post it. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah.
Sir, for the assignment too, can I submit by Monday like that? I
You
think
know
it
that I
takes
am
like
not. I am not strict about deadlines. You can see that already. Take your time. Just unless everyone submits, I cannot give the answer.
okay.
That's the only. Okay. Good.
So what is the deadline for the assignment one? When you only if the 3 people will submit, you will send it, right?
Yeah, I
Assignment
am.
one.
I think I will submit. I'll give it this weekend. But if these people are not submitting, what can I do? But the point is that I'm not very strict about deadlines. Don't worry about it too much. But the deadlines are needed for a different reason, because every week there is an assignment, right? So if you don't do it this week, then next week you have to do 2 assignments. So it's double load. That is why the deadlines are there. Because as I said, it's a self-grading. So I don't care what you do with that. Okay. So if you are 1-2 days late, it is okay, not a big deal. But if you are late, then next week's assignment is going to pile up, right? That's why don't be late.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sir, and also
Okay.
one thing that assignment one in that assignment one, in that finding whether in that slit is moving with respect to electron frame.
Hmm.
Is it possible to use uncertainty there? I think of it.
Yeah,
I
you can
think
use, but here you don't need uncertainty. It's not a point of uncertainty. The point is to understand that what kind of wave these are and why they are not transforming. You can, I mean, I don't think uncertainty will help you to assign that particular question, but you can use uncertainty to explain some other thing like the interference pattern and all. But the particular question I asked is not about uncertainty.
yes, I found some paper also something. There it
Okay.
was it did it in different ways in like we're doing that optics eigenvalue thing we do, right, for finding
I
the
don't know
interference.
about that. You can perhaps post the paper and the question in Piazza. Then I can see the paper and see what are you talking
Okay,
about.
after you send the solution, I will post
Okay.
then.
Okay. Good. See you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. See you.